All right, guys, so since this is a client-side, regular, just JavaScript course, pure JavaScript, there's not too much that we have to do in terms of setting up our environment. You can use a Windows machine, you can use a Mac, you can use Linux, any operating system you want. You can use any browser or text editor, although there are a couple suggestions that I would make. Especially if you're following along with the course and you want to follow every little thing. So what I'm going to be using as a browser is Google Chrome, which is what I would recommend for all web development, and I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code as my text editor, which I would also recommend for just about any type of web development. Now, like I said, we're not going to need any tools except for the last project. The last project, we're going to be using something called ES 2015 modules, which still aren't implemented in the browser, so we need a little help. So we're going to need something called Webpack and Babel to compile our code down to older ES5 JavaScript. So when we get to that last project, we're going to have to do a little more installation. We're going to have to install Node.js because we need npm to install Webpack and all that stuff. All right, but with the exception of that very last project, all we need is a text editor and a browser. So what I'm going to do here is download Visual Studio Code at code.visualstudio.com. It's completely cross-platform. And again, you do not have to use this text editor. It's a recommendation of mine, but you can use whatever you want. You can use Notepad if you want, although that I definitely wouldn't recommend it. So we're going to download that. We'll say open when done. And not only are we going to install it, but I'm going to show you a couple plugins to set up and just a little bit of configuration. All right, and if you want to kind of match the course exactly and follow along exactly, then I would suggest this. So let's click next, and let's just go through this real quick. The folder already exists. That's fine. I already had it installed, so that's why I'm getting that message. And we'll go ahead and click next. And then right here, this is very important. You want to check off this Add Open with Code with both of these check marks. What this does is it'll let you right-click on a folder or a file and say Open with Visual Studio Code, and it'll open it in that location. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Click Next, and then Install. Visual Studio Code also comes with something called Emmet, which is a way to use HTML and CSS shortcodes. Now, even though this isn't an HTML course, we will be typing quite a bit of HTML, so it's good to have Emmet to use those shortcodes. It makes things quicker. Now, if you're using a different text editor like Atom or Sublime Text or something like that, you can install Emmet as an add-on or as a plugin. Okay, but it's actually default with Visual Studio Code. All right, so now it's installed. I'm going to go ahead and click Finish, and it's going to open it up. All right, so it just opened up some release notes and a welcome page. We can open a file or folder from here. I'm going to just close this welcome page up. And what I want to do is, first of all, go to File and Preferences and then Settings. Now, this is how you configure your text editor or how you change preferences in Visual Studio Code. You use this JSON file. It's just one big file. You can see you can expand things for different categories. And if you want to change something, you just copy that object, that key value pair, and put it over here and save. Now, a couple things I want to do is optimize the text size so that you guys can see it better. So this editor font size right here, what I'm going to do is copy that. Over here, we want to put it into a set of curly braces like that. And I'm going to set the size to 26. Okay, and then if I do Control S or File Save, that'll kick right in. Another thing I want to do is change the tab size. So what I'm going to do is search over here for tab, and this editor tab size, which by default is 4, I'm going to change that to 2 because I think with 4 it spreads your code over a little too far, and I don't like that, so I'm going to change that to 2. And then the last thing I want to change is the word wrap. By default, word wrap is off, meaning that your code will go off screen, and especially where I'm doing a course, I really don't want that. I want you guys to see all the code, so I'm going to go ahead and turn that on. All right, once I do that, I'll just do Control S, save that, and now I have the settings that I want. All right, so the next thing I want to do is install a couple extensions. So we're going to click this icon, and this shows you a bunch of recommended or suggested extensions. But what I want first is something called Live Server. So I'm going to search for Live Server. And it's this first one here. And what this does is it allows us to open up just a regular HTML file on our local host. So instead of opening it from the file system, it'll open it on, for instance, localhost port 5500. And it also gives us auto load. So every time I save a JavaScript file or the HTML file, it'll auto load. I won't have to go and click the reload button in the browser, which is really nice. Now, if you're using the Atom text editor, there's something called Atom Live Server, which is pretty much the exact same thing, just for that editor. And I'm sure Sublime has one, and other text editors if you're using them. I would definitely suggest it. So I'm going to click install here, and that'll go ahead and install it. And while that's happening, I'm going to go and search for another extension called, what is it called? Bracket Colorizer. Okay, Bracket Pair Colorizer. And what this does is it makes bracket pairs a certain color so that you don't get mixed up if you have, for instance, nested if statements. It'll pair the brackets together, which is really helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and install that. All right, and then the last thing I want to install is the JavaScript ES6 snippets, which is right here, JavaScript ES6 code snippets, and that'll just give us some nice IntelliSense with ES6. So we're going to click install for that. Okay, and then once these are done, you can click reload or just exit the browser and go back in, and those should be all set up. You can see that these three extensions are now installed. All right, so let me just give you a quick preview of how Live Server works. So if I create a new folder here, let's just call it project, and we can go and we can right click and say open with code. And now we have the project over here on the left, and I can create a new file. I can call it index.html, and we have Emmet installed by default. Now the key for Emmet is tab by default. So if I do, for instance, h1 tab, it'll give me a pair of h1 tags. I can also do classes and IDs. For instance, I can say hash test tab, and that'll give me a div with the ID of test. If I want to do a class, I can do dot test or whatever I want to call it and tab, and it'll give me the class of test. If I wanted to do an h1 with a class of hello, we could do that. Okay, we can also do an exclamation mark and then tab, and it gives us a basic HTML document with head and body tags, which is really nice and really speeds things up. Now, just to give you an example of how Live Server works, I'm going to go ahead and just put an h1 in here and just say hello and save. And what I could do is I could either open up index.html right from my file system like that, or I could use Live Server by just right clicking and saying open with Live Server, and then that will automatically open up a browser with that file in there. And I can snap this over like that. And now if I go and I edit this and I change this to hello world and then I just save with Control S, you'll see that it auto updates. Okay, it auto uploads. I don't have to go over and click the reload button, and that works really well for courses like this. All right, you'll see that this is running on my local host, my loopback address, and then port 5500, and then we're in the index.html file. All right, so I think everything is set up for the course, at least for now, until we get to the last project. So in the next section, we're going to start to work with the fundamentals of the JavaScript language. This is going to be great for beginners. You're going to learn all about data types and functions and loops and operators and all that kind of stuff. Of course, if you are a professional JavaScript developer, you probably know most of, if not all of this stuff, but I would suggest watching it as a refresher. If not, just move on to the next section, which is DOM manipulation. All right, thanks guys, and I will see you in the next video.